The Big Silence. The Big Silence.
Hello, hello. Welcome back to the Big Silence podcast. It's your girl, Karena Dawn, and your host. And I'm excited that you are back here today. I am currently sitting in a hotel room in Los Angeles. I'm filming new workouts for the Tone It Up app. And yes, I should be getting ready right now, but I'm having some coffee, chilling here with a Pomeranian by my side, and then I'm going to head over to set. New workouts coming in your app this fall for the fall challenge. So make sure you download your Tone It Up app. So I had a great conversation last week with Dr. Caroline Leaf. She's a neuroscientist and bestselling author of How to Help Your Child. It's a great discussion about today's children and how they're facing a mental health crisis. And I loved this conversation because for parents out there or partners even, there are so many great techniques and takeaways that we talk about. So I really think this is a beautiful episode because you can learn so much and then you can take this into all of these tips into your personal homes. So enjoy this. As always, share it. I'm sure you have many friends that, post-COVID, need some help with, parenting and how to deal with mental health crisis of our future generations. Subscribe to the podcast on Apple so you get notified for every episode so you don't miss them. Also, leave a review because each month we choose someone with the top review and we send you some Big Silence and Tone It Up swag. All right, enjoy the app and I'll see you later. All right, welcome to the podcast, Dr. Caroline Leaf.
So good to be with you. Thank you so much for having me on your show.
Of course. I'm really excited for this conversation because you have your book coming out, How to Help Your Child Clean Up Their Mental Mess. And I've had so many conversations, not only on the podcast, but also with my friends who have kids, about everything we've been through the past years. Like, what do I do? And I was actually talking to my friend Jeremy this morning, and he has a 10-year-old girl. And we were talking about the difference of like how we grew up and what we did and the freedoms we had. And we would ride our bikes and not talk to our parents for hours. And there was no worries and nothing. And we were just like out there exploring and the difference of today's society. So building resilience, where shall we start here? There's a lot of questions. And by the way, I put a question box on my Instagram yesterday morning, and I've never had so many responses.
Wow, that's amazing. And I'm so glad that your listeners have asked so many questions. It just shows the concern that people have, and parents and caregivers and teachers, on just what's going on with mental health with kids and how important it is to deal with this stuff. And also the fact that you talk about being able to have that free unstructured play. You need 3 to 5 hours of that a day for our healthy mind, brain, body networks. But kids these days are getting maybe a few minutes unstructured play. So things have changed through COVID, the pandemic, social media. But, I think the biggest point, and probably the reason why I released this book now, is the fact that changes like this, we're facing unique changes. But every generation has faced unique changes. So it's not like, there was radio, there was TV, there was wars, there were it's not that change is new. And every change is different. I think there's another underlying factor here, which is what I've addressed in this book and what I've seen in the 38 years I've been in the field. And that is mind management. I think we have removed that, not I think, but from a clinical and research perspective, if we don't help our kids and ourselves as adults understand our mind and what it is and how it works and give tools for mind management, we will land up with a crisis. We can't just, put people's experiences down to just a list of symptoms. We have to look at the whole person in their whole environment. And that's what worries me more. We need it. And in teaching our kids mind management, we teach them how to deal with the changes that are coming, because more changes are coming, more radical changes. How do we manage social media? How do we manage AI? Those are the questions I believe we should be asking, as opposed to just dealing with the effects.
Yeah. And going back to, there's always change that you said, like even my grandparents immigrated here from the Ukraine in 1950. Like that was heavy. Like yeah. And then there's that generational trauma. There's that everything. Like there's always going to be something So now we're actually talking about it. Because when I grew up in the 90s and my mom was diagnosed with schizophrenia and depression, I was like, what? But at least we're talking about it now. And so now the great thing is about what you're doing and how to help the children, because little Karena would have loved to have parents or my own knowledge of how to help my mental mess at the time. So at least now we're opening up these conversations.
Absolutely. And that's such a thrill, because I've been watching this trajectory over the course of my career of it's such a contradiction, because in the 80s and early 90s, when I was studying and started working, doing my research, there was a clear distinction between the mind and the brain, and the recognition of the mind-brain-body network, a clear distinction that a person, the way they respond to life is as the result of adverse circumstances, and you need a whole team support, a very holistic support. There was all of that going on. But at the same time, there was hush-hush around the extreme cases and extreme situations.
Mm-hmm.
So it was almost like this paradox of the right approach, but when it came to people in extreme states, it was kind of hush-hush. At least now we talk about all of it. But at the same time, we've had another problem that links to the mind management, and that's the reductionistic approach, where everything's been reduced down to, oh, well, you said it's your brain, and it's your brain is being blamed for everything, and that's also not right, because we are such complex beings within such complex environments. You can't take the person out the environment. The environment's impacting us, and there's generational stuff and all that stuff. You talk about Ukraine. I've been there, by the way, a couple of times.
Have you?
Yes, I have. Just between the wars, literally.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, you think of that now, that's been triggered for people that, like yourself. I mean, what's going on there? So in other words, these things, there's just always something. So I think that the openness is vital, but how we talk about it and how we talk to our children about this is so important. And you also pointed out, when you were younger, I grew up in the generation as well, where you just didn't talk about your feelings. You didn't talk about what you're going through. It was, you'll deal with that. You'll get through this. It's okay. Just be strong. It's not so bad. And I mean, you suppress stuff. And we know the evidence from the ACEs, early childhood trauma affecting adulthood, any trauma at any stage, all these, we know now, is established fact that unmanaged chronic toxic stress is going to result in mental and physical health problems. And that's my field, been my field of research for all these years, showing that this is a reality, but not so much that this is the reality. What can we do about it? That's very key. Let's talk about this thing as we're doing. Let's talk about it properly. Let's look at it from multiple angles and so on.
Yeah. So how do you discuss with your children mental health? The first simple step.
First simple step is to tell yourself and your children it's okay to be a mess. That's really key. It's one of my key phrases I say. It's to adults and children alike, because humans are messy. Life is messy. We are a mess. There's no normal brain. A study came out of Yale in 2018. I think it was 2018, late 2018, saying there is no normal brain, because every brain is unique. The fact that we are so unique, the fact that it's okay to be messy, the fact that life is messy, I think that's a message we need to get through, because in our advances in brain science, and as I said, I've been in this field for a long time now, we've become very neuro-reductionistic, focused around the brain, and that has almost taken away the permission that we need to give ourselves to be messy, and that the openness that I was trying to, you talk about the big silence as your podcast, that this openness to talk about it is trying to deal with that. But so the first thing is to help a person to accept it's okay to be a mess. We mustn't pathologize childhood and medicalize misery. And the best way to do that for your child is for you to manage your own mess, and to acknowledge that, like, maybe you come home from a bad day, or maybe things are going on that just make you feel very unsettled, and that changes your expression on your face. Kids read body language better than an adult. They are very, very insightful, way more than what we've given them credit for. I talk about that in my book as well and give some research studies. They also love authenticity. So if you as a parent or caregiver or uncle or aunt, whatever, can basically show a child that, hey, I'm feeling really sad today. I just woke up feeling like uneasy and something's worrying me and I'm trying to put my finger on it. And you kind of process through, and there's a way you can actually do that. That's very, very, very what we call psychoneurobiological. In other words, it actually changes the drivers that drive our functioning. So as you go through a specific pathway of discussing this openly with your child, you are doing that very first major step, which is it's okay to be a mess. I'm a mess. this is how I'm managing it. And that sends a message to them that, oh, okay, well, big people also are battling, but this is how they're dealing with it.
Yeah. And I love that message because I feel for many, many years, especially through social media and some people I know, they're like, oh, I don't want to be upset in front of my child. I don't want to talk about it. I want it to be perfect. I want this and that. I'm like, well, but life is messy and that's okay. I say that all the time. My husband and I will get in an argument. He's like, we shouldn't be fighting. I'm like, no, we're not the same person. It's okay.
It's okay to be exactly. It's what you do with the argument. That's the key. That's the
Yeah.
management aspect. That's the mind management. So it's our uniqueness will create clashes, but what do you do about it?
Yeah.
So yeah.
Like in our arguments, I want to say, I call them disagreements. I'm like, we are not the same human. We do not have to agree, and that's okay.
I love it. Exactly. And it's that acceptance of difference that is so vital for us moving forward. But I think what's happened is that in the desire to help, we can sometimes get unbalanced. And I think the imbalances come in and that will say, okay, it's bad to argue. What's wrong? There's something wrong with us. Meanwhile, they work it through, work out what there could be a pattern that's emerging or whatever. But if someone has an emotion like depression or sadness or something, it's seen immediately as a symptom of an illness instead of as a signal that's giving you information. So we don't want to run from that. The research is very clear, and from many, many researchers and my own clinical experience, we want to embrace however we're showing up in order to process, to find the source so that we can actually deconstruct and reconstruct. Because we can't change what's happened to us, but we can change what it looks like inside of us and how that plays into the future. And that's something you can teach children as young as 2. This is what's so crazy about this. You can really come in from this angle, and we need to get our parents feeling not so guilty if they do something wrong, that they feel, this messiness is okay. Let's start working through it.
I think that is, there's a lot of parent guilt of all of that. So coming out of that and being like, this is okay. I have a question here. So I was talking to a friend today, and they recently had a 9-year-old child, this kind of goes into what you were just talking about, diagnosed with bipolar. So my question, let me give a little bit more background too. Parents are going through a divorce. The mom is upset that their child was diagnosed this early. But what is your opinion on the diagnosis of kids so young to depression, anxiety, bipolar at 9 years old and going to a doctor and they're like, well, they have these swings because they have bipolar?
So it's an excellent question. Thank you for asking that. And I think it really goes to a lot of what people are experiencing and my own experience of working with people and so on. I have a whole chapter on this kind of thing in the book. So this Cliff Notes version is that if you get that diagnosis, is that going to help you? Initially, it may, because it gives you some kind of name to the manifestation of behaviors or how a person is showing up. But then it's almost like a gift that's empty. So once you've got that diagnosis, then what? And that's where the wheels fall off the bus, because there's so much more. Now, you already gave a bit of context. There's a divorce going on. We don't know exactly what the situation is at home, but children will very often blame themselves for what's going on in their parents' lives unless it's explained to them. And as you say, so many parents have grown up, even young parents have grown up with, you don't share too much with children and all that kind of thing. Meanwhile, obviously there's boundaries. You're not going to tell intimate details, but to help a child understand, we don't get on anymore, we're getting divorced because of these reasons, they need that. Mm-hmm. And otherwise, they don't know how to process it. So every experience that a person has, including this child that we're talking about now, that experience is being processed by the mind into the brain and the body and the mind. It's in the whole network. And that becomes physical tree-like structures made of proteins in the brain. It becomes changes in every cell of our body. It's embodied. It becomes changes in the networks of our actual mind, which is different from the brain. And that's what shows up in our life, how we function. So something as huge as a divorce in the home is going to create a lot of confusion in a 9-year-old. And then if it's not being spoken about, that child's not processing. So this experience is coming in. And if you imagine a big, ugly tree, this where the roots of the actual divorce process and what's all the stuff around there that we don't even know the details of, that child is seeing that daily. Whatever you think about the most is growing. So this thing's growing. it's also now a reaction in the brain and body's immune system, because now this toxic tree is not something that the brain and body can handle very well. So there's going to be a lot of biological responses to that. And all of that energy's got to go somewhere. Energy is not lost. Energy is always transferred. So it will come out in the child's behaviors and mood swings. It's funny, I've actually got my book open right on a page where I talk about, and there's one of the signals is behaviors is mood swings with things. And so mood swings, extreme mood swings, is a child trying to process what is going on. Now, if you don't help a child to process, those mood swings can become very big mood swings and can become very disruptive. And that's what's so critical, that we actually help the child to process. So I don't like that diagnosis because I don't see it helping the child. And in the United States, and it's kind of the laughing stock of like the UK and various other countries, in the United States, they're diagnosing kids as young as 2 with pediatric bipolar. So I mean, this is ridiculous.
Wow.
So what we need to do is stand back and take a deep, long look at how can we help that child. So when I practiced something like that, a situation like that, the most important thing is that you would need to hear the entire story from the parent and from the child, and then work with a whole team. You would work with a whole team. You wouldn't diagnose. You would actually work with a team. You would get the story, and then you would address the problems. If there's medical issues, which is very possible because of the extreme nature of what the child's going through, you address those. If there's behavioral issues, if there's learning issues, you address each, but understanding, doing it more as a therapeutic thing, as opposed to just like slapping on a label and probably this child's been given a medication. The thing there, though, is the identity issue. And there's another whole aspect there. I've also got a whole chapter on that. You think of a child who's trying to process a parent's divorce, and they're probably thinking, what have I done to cause this? And they're not being allowed to process that. And now they're being taken to a doctor and they know the mom's worried, they know the dad's worried, they're sensing that, but nothing's been said, or maybe not enough has been said. Maybe they are picking all of that up. Now they go to the doctor, and the doctor now is giving another label. That's made the mom, you said the mom, a key thing, the mom's very upset about this, but maybe still not talking to the child. So now the child's thinking, they're divorcing because of me. There's something wrong with me. It's upsetting my mom even more. I'm bad. I don't know what to do with this energy. So my mood is going to swing. They're not saying that out loud, but that's what's happening in an unconscious mind. So I would treat that situation very differently to a label. I think the label is very limiting. Does that make sense?
It makes absolute sense to me. And as I was having this conversation this morning, I was just like, I just remember me being a child and having my mom being diagnosed, a missing person's diagnosed with schizophrenia and this, and then my mind is everywhere. I turn to my own situational depression, my rebellion, my this, and like, and thank God, like this mental disease has skipped a generation. So now I have the ability to share the story and, help others. But back then, I'm sure I could have been diagnosed with something,
Absolutely. If you'd gone, I mean, I'm sure you've heard and read about how anyone can get, I have a room full of people in front of me and everyone can get a label and that's the whole thing, is that they shouldn't be labeled. We should take all that information as descriptions of how people are showing up and group it. And that's what I've done with my work, and what I've tried to make very easy for parents is how you show up. Take that as your aspect. Like you saying, when you were a child and your mom was diagnosed with schizophrenia, and what you had to go through with pretty much an absent parent, and not understanding this, and you didn't know how to process it yourself and all that kind of stuff. If we could help even it was your dad or someone in the family, even if your mom had the tools to have been able to help you to sit down and say, all right, what's going on with mom? This is what's going on with mom. This is it's not you. But let's talk about the impact on you, because this is impacting you. Mental health challenges in a family member do impact the other family member. It's traumatic. You went through trauma, and that's very scary. And how do you process that? And so if you can teach a child to understand rather how they show up, teach an adult to understand how they show up, and use all those big scary words rather as descriptions versus labels, because labels are so finite. They're so
defines you, but it shouldn't.
Yeah, they're like cancer, diabetes. They're very, very scary words. But if you break them down, because if you give someone an it word like diabetes or cancer or something like that, you do need to have underlying neurobiological reasons for that. You do need to have tests to test for that. You need to have a very specific set of guidelines. So rather use it, which we don't have for those things. There's all kinds of science behind that, and we can go into that if you wanted to. But essentially, what would be much better than even debating that is to say, okay, that child is showing up in this way. Let's describe it. Let's describe what those emotions are. Let's describe what the behaviors are. What are they saying? What are they doing? How are they saying it? How are they doing it? Let's talk about how this is showing up in their body. Maybe there's migraines. Maybe there's a persistent pattern of illness starting to happen. Let's talk about their perspective. How's this little 9-year-old looking at life? So those are 4. I've held up 4 fingers. I've identified 4 signals. And a signal gives us information. So if we're going to analyze how we show up, we need to read the signals of how we show up. In that moment, how is that child showing up today as they get ready for school in the morning, or how they came home from school, or how they're showing up at school, and start to analyze that information and then work through, sort of a sequence of processes. You can actually get to a point where you can't change the fact that the divorce is happening and the child's been impacted, but you can get to a point of helping the child understand what's going on and how to deal with that. That's really key.
Yeah. Can we go back to migraines? Number one, migraines and stress. I have one friend with a kid who gets migraines a lot. And then I have a friend who's in his 40s and getting migraines all of a sudden. So just talking about the neuroscience around migraines and stress.
So there's a correlation. They've done a correlation. The causative link hasn't totally been established, so no medical professional will directly say that the migraine is directly linked to stress, but it's always one of the aspects that's correlated, because there could be so many other factors like food and allergies and medications and so on. But it's pretty clear that there's a very strong correlation. And, a migraine is when the blood vessels are basically too dilated, so there's so much blood pumping through. That's where you get that heavy, intense sense of nausea and blinding. You can't look at light and that kind of thing, and it feels like this thing is like almost like something's alive in your brain, pulsating, and it's very overwhelming. And there's enough research out there showing that it's a very strong correlation, and especially if there's a sudden onput. There's a sudden, because then the first thing that I would do if I was still practicing, I would just get the person's narrative and see if we can track down what maybe there was some sort of trigger. And if there's a pattern, then that then maybe becomes a pattern. Like you said, the child consistently gets them. I would look at the association between when and where it's happening. So the who, what, when, where, why, how. And I would look at the migraine as a physical symptom, but then I would look at, okay, let's look at the rest of the signals and let's see if we can find a pattern, and then find the details of the pattern, the who, what, when, where, why, how, and do that reflective process. And then from there, okay, this is what's happening now. What are we going to do? So going through that kind of process. So in terms of how does that happen, I can explain that as well. I can explain the neurophysiology of why do we get reactions in our body? The main thing is to understand is that our mind is not the same as the brain. The brain is this incredibly complex physical substrate, but without you being alive, the brain just disintegrates, it does nothing. Same with the body. The body is a bunch of cells and works very complex ways linked with the brain, but it doesn't, if you're dead, it doesn't do anything. Your heart can't pump anymore. Nothing works. So there's something that seems to give life to this physical, and that we can categorize this as mind. So mind's got 2 aspects. It kind of drives the physicality of us, but it also is how we experience humanity. So how we think, feel, and choose in response to love and fear and situations that happen in our life, like divorce and parents with a mental illness, mental challenges and so on. So it's how also the joys of life and the love. So it's how we as a human can experience life. So it's how we uniquely think, feel, and choose. So that's the psychological. Then there's a whole bunch of physiology, which whatever, I don't have to get into that. In the most simple explanation, this child whose parents are going through divorce, or the child who's having migraines, or the conversation we're having now, all of these are experiences. There's sound waves, there's electromagnetic light waves. In other words, every experience has got a physical aspect. The mind grabs that on a physical level and puts that into the brain as waves of energy. And the brain responds on a neurochemical, electromagnetic, and genetic level. So kind of like waves of the sea. As person's talking, there's waves of information coming in, builds and it collapses, and this whole cycle's going on, and that sends a message to the body, and proteins are made, and all kinds of amazing stuff. At the end of this conversation, you've got a little thought tree in your brain with proteins and vibrations, which is our conversation. And so that child parents going through the divorce, each day that child's adding more and more, has got a thought tree that's getting bigger and bigger with each new experience that's happening. And that if you think of a tree's got root system, trunk, and branches. So the roots is where it grows from, seeds planted in the ground. So as the divorce discussion starts, or as the rumblings between the relationship start, that's the seed. And as the child's observing the relationship break down, those are all the roots that are forming. And then as the interactions happen and whatever, as that's happening, as the roots of an experience, what I've just described, or as you and I are talking, those would be roots. But then each person uniquely interprets what you and I are talking about, that child's uniquely interpreting the potential divorce as through their own unique way of processing, which is the way their mind is working. No two minds work the same. And the brain is accommodating to the unique mind, uniqueness of brain, uniqueness of mind. And then the branches are how that particular person is responding to that information. So the coping strategies, the trauma responses, the self-talk, all that stuff is how, oh, I'm a bad child. My parents are breaking up because of me. It's my fault. I've done this and I've done that, and guilt and what's wrong with me and whatever, all this. And then that collectively, that tree with the roots and trunk and branch, plus its connection to the body, the changes in the cells, because we put this in every single cell of our body, and the mind network, which is all these like fields, all of that collectively booms out, and that's you in a situation. So now let's say there's this constant toxic stuff coming in. The energy waves are all we see from the research. I do a lot of research with mind, brain, body. So we use QEEGs and various different ways of looking at how the brain's responding to experiences. We also look in the body and see what the responses are. So I'll just take two simple examples. If that toxic experience comes in that way, the child, maybe the parents have an argument. So this is an experience. It's waves coming in. Think of the waves of the sea. They have big, like far out to sea, they're big, and then they get smaller, and then they build up to like kind of go flattish. They build up to a wave, get a white crash on the beach, make little ones, and they go back in. Now that's what when we are going through the ups and downs and the normal things of life, and sometimes we cry and we're sad and we're happy, and the normal things of life, kind of if you think of a scale of 1 to 10, those would be the 1, 2s, and 3s, the ups and downs and all stuff of life. Okay. Then this child's experiencing that, then those waves would be flowing like that. It's like I've just described across the brain, and your brain and body, all your hormones and your HPA axis and which is your hypothalamic pituitary stress axis, all the things, immune system, things are doing what they should be doing. We've got this, what we call Goldilocks principle. We can deal with a little bit of bad, a little bit of good, kind of in between. But now a lot of bad comes, the abuse or the trauma of what you went through with your mom, this issue with this divorce, whatever. So now this is not such a nice thing. This is now tipping on the side of, okay, this is not so good. And so now the waves, instead of being a normal wave of energy, are now disrupted. So maybe they're bigger than what they should be. There's more intensity. There's more violence as they hit the beach. There's that wave pattern changes, which changes how the blood flows. It changes how everything, every bit of functionality in the brain, right down to the endocrines, every part of the body, that starts shifting. So then that affects and can show up in different ways in different people. So maybe with a person who's battling with migraine, that toxic tree, which when I say toxic, when we build a thought, if it's a happy, great, like you falling in love with your husband and having a great wedding, whatever, that's a happy memory. That would be a beautiful green tree. So you explain it to kids, and I explain it like this in the book. But that ugly tree with no leaves and it looks kind of old and burnt, that would be an unhappy experience, like someone teasing you at school, or this experience with your parents. The unhappy tree, your brain doesn't really like that much in your body. So it sends out soldiers, the immune system, to basically fight that, because that tree, instead of having nice green leaves, it's all bent, and so the proteins are almost folded. So your immune system starts fighting that. And that, the more we don't deal with something, the more the energy builds and the more vulnerable our body becomes, and the more our chance of manifesting with some sort of a illness starts showing up. So it's not immediate, it's cumulative over time. But as we don't process, as we go through these things and they just stick around for years in our head, so we decrease our biological health, and our biological age decreases, and our vulnerability to disease increases by 35 to 98%. So that's what I'm trying to prevent with the work I do, is to try and help us process, so we don't have this backfiring effect. You're still going to cry, you're still going to have bad times, but your resilience is to not get into that state, to be able to, not stay down there, but to actually maybe get knocked, but then to get back up again. And that's resilience. this is not resilience.
Yeah.
This is when we stay stuck down there. And the earlier we start, the better.
I always say my superpower is resilience. I've had to
There
learn
you
it through
go.
the years.
You have got resilience. And you're so right, Karena, because humans are resilient. So what we do in our lifespan is we either unmask and grow, or we mask and diminish. And if someone can get an insight into how they've coped, which is the branches of the tree, and how that didn't work, and adjust like you've done with your life, you've unmasked and grown your resilience. And so it's naturally pouring out of you now to help others, which is helping you every time you help someone else.
Yeah, exactly. And I can't wait to share this with the two people that I have in mind and send them your book and everyone else. This is brilliant. But okay. So what are you talk about simple daily exercises that, as we speak about resilience, that children can do to overcome the mental mess and become resilient?
So the first thing that we do is ourselves as parents and adults in a child's life is to learn how to manage our own and be very open about it. So I've developed a system called the NeuroCycle. And the NeuroCycle is based on theory and research, and I still do research. I'm a full-on scientist, plus I don't practice anymore. I now basically take all of the stuff and write simple books. I have an app as well, so that mental health can become accessible and affordable, which is exactly the goal that you have too. So mine is very much, let's empower people to understand their mind and then recognize when they need extra support on top of. But first and foremost, you as a parent, your child as a child, you live with your mind. Your mind, as I explained, drives everything. So you wake up with yourself at 3 a.m, the panic attack. You can't phone your therapist. If you're married, you can maybe wake up your husband or wife or partner, whatever. A child maybe at school being bullied, what do they do? In other words, we have to empower our children to manage their mind. So the key daily thing that we want to do is to get a child to know how to do mind management, which is essentially self-regulation. So the NeuroCycle is the tool of mind management. If you want to manage your mind, we need a tool to do it. And why do we need a tool or a system? Is because that mind thing is connected to the brain and the body, and it's doing all these things I've described. And to fix up those proteins and those trees and your cells and all these fancy things, it takes time, and it also takes a very specific sequence. So I wanted to understand that. So my research was to try and find out how could I help my patients identify how they're showing up and reverse engineer what they'd grown in their brain, because the brain can change. Back in the 80s, they didn't know the brain could change yet. They didn't think it could. And I did some of the first work in this area in the late 80s on neuroplasticity, the fact that your mind can actually change your brain. So I've taken all of that and created something simple, because I need to say, okay, how can I do this with a 2-year-old? How can I do this with someone who's in such a broken mental state from such severe abuse and undealt with trauma? They're not going to do anything fancy. What can I do that's simple and that is real and that works? So all the science was kind of put into a very simple version, but a very simple system called the NeuroCycle, initially called something else. As we go over time, we find better words to describe things. And it's basically 5 steps. It's the 5 steps that we as humans are doing on an unconscious level 24/7. It's basically how our mind works through the brain and the body. So it's a 5-step system. Within each, there's a lot of neurophysiology going on, but you don't even have to know about that. You just have to know to do the 5 steps in the right order. And that's what I explain in the book. And I've got an app, and I've got books for 12 and up as well. So in adults and whatever. Okay, so do you want me to explain the 5 steps?
Sure. Yeah, I think you should definitely go get the book to get all the details. But yeah, let's hear the 5 steps.
Wherever you want to go, I can in whichever direction you'd like to.
Let's hear the 5 steps.
Okay, so the first thing you have to do is prepare your brain. So that's not a step yet, it's a preparing of your brain. And that's very much along the lines of, you've got a lot of these kinds of resources on your website, meditation and breathing and all that kind of stuff. And that's very popular. And I've got lots of examples for how to do it with kids. I have it in my app. I have an app called the NeuroCycle. Why am I talking about this? Brain preparation is extremely important to get our mind-brain network tuned in and activated and calm enough so that you can actually do the work of managing your mental health. So when we talk to a child about managing mental health, which is also one of your earlier questions, and how do you, we shouldn't make it something scary. We should just talk about the mind. And the mind is what makes us work. And sometimes we have bad experiences, and that messes up how our mind's working and makes it messy. And this is how we can fix the mess. That's really what the NeuroCycle, the simplest way that you explain this to the child is life is messy. We build these messy trees. We're cleaning up the trees. That's kind of a simple way of explaining it. And with the roots, I've even got pictures of. There's cartoons throughout the book. I'm sure you saw of this character called Brainy that I've created. We even have a toy, little toy, fluffy toy called Brainy. It's the little superhero who walks your mental health journey with you, and he helps you manage your mind, and it's Brainy. So it's giving the child the message that, hey, I control my brain. My brain doesn't control me. I can actually change this brain, and therefore my life kind of thing. So
Brainy is yours? You sell that?
Yes.
Or
Yes, I've sold this. Yeah, so it's basically a character I created 25 years ago. And I had an artist, a Disney artist, actually draw this, and then we resurrected it for this book. So it's throughout this. It's so blurry. Sorry, it's throughout this book. I can take the blue off. I need to take the blue off. So I teach the children, help parents teach their children this NeuroCycle by using Brainy. So you'll see that character as a cartoon throughout the entire book. And every concept, like the trees, you'll see Brainy with a tree and the different happy trees and sad trees, and the 5 steps of the NeuroCycle, there's Brainy doing each of those steps. So, and there's scenarios and things like that. So we've even got a coloring book with the different scenarios that people can get. So there's a whole kit. They can get the Brainy and the book from our website, drleaf.com, and then the book's available wherever books are sold. So essentially the idea is that a child and an adult, we relate to cartoons, we relate to physical things, etc. So when you're teaching something like this to a child, that's why I created this character. And like a 2-year-old, for example, a 2-year-old or a 3-year-old, let's say they've been bullied at daycare, and you pick them up from daycare and they're throwing a tantrum and they're sad and they won't eat and they're crying and they maybe, throw their toys. They don't know that's energy coming out. They don't know how to say it. But if you've created an environment where you've got Brainy in the book, and you've got a little toy box, and you've got an area in maybe your sitting room that's a cute little beanbag or a cute little chair in this toy box, and that's your mind area. In other words, you create a designated space in your area, like you cook in a kitchen, you do mind work in this area. You don't always have to just do it there, but to teach this to a child and to train ourselves to keep mind as your first priority, because the NeuroCycle is helping you manage your mind. It's great with children to have a designated space. And so that 2-year-old comes home and you've got this idea going, they go sit down in that space. Maybe they throw themselves down and they pick up Brainy, and they might even make Brainy fight with things, but they're telling you a message because you've created a space that it's okay to be messy. This is not who you are. I understand that you're going through something. There's a because of, in simple words. And I give you developmental tables and how to say the words and all these things in the book. But it's a point of contact. Maybe all the child has to do is pick up Brainy with another toy or something. And that's, okay, Mom, I need help. I need to talk.
Mm-hmm.
It's taken away that scary, I don't know what to do with how I'm feeling and all those sorts of things. So that's kind of all part of your preparation, is prepare an area. You can even paint a wall with chalkboard paint and have a thing of chalk, or you can have crayons and art supplies so that they can actually go and explain how they feel. So we put this major importance on managing of our mind. And let's say that you have a bad day, and I'll come to the 5 steps in a moment. As a parent, and you walk in the door and you've had a really stressful day, and this has happened, that's happened, you're worried about mom or your dad or whatever, you don't have to just try and suppress it. Remember, authenticity and modeling for kids and body language, all that stuff, insight. You go sit in the wheelchair and you start going through the process. So you're demonstrating for the child, okay, I'm feeling sad because of this and this. And maybe you even walk in the door and you yell at your kids, or you say, you are always driving me crazy, and you immediately feel parent guilt. But you can go and sit there and say, I'm so sorry. I never meant to say that behavior. I'm so frustrated, emotions. My tummy's so sore from feeling like this, bodily sensation. And today life just sucks. Perspective. You've modeled for the kids, and then you'd walk through the next step. So that step that I've just described now is the first of the 5 steps, where I have gathered awareness of 4 signals: my emotions, my behaviors, my bodily sensations, and my perspectives. And as I've sat in the beanbag or whatever, and I've done those 4. Now, maybe just before I did that, I'm so worked up when I walk in the door that maybe just to calm down my neurophysiology, I do a bit of brain preparation. And that could be something as simple as breathing in for 3 counts and out for 7. It's called a 10-second pause. It's absolutely outstanding to calm down the neurophysiology, especially if you breathe in and then you force it out 7 counts, and you do it six to 9 times, you push so much oxygen to the front of the brain that you can calm down that big wave. It kind of starts calming down, which means that the chemicals and hormones and all the other stuff in your brain and body that just need to calm down will calm down. So you can go throw yourself on the beanbag and say, and you can start working through the NeuroCycle. So that's the idea. And you model that. Your kid will come home from school, even your teenager, and they'll throw themselves down in the beanbag. And, this is the safe space. This is where I need to talk. This is where I need to be listened to. And that's what you want to create.
I love this. I'm also in my brain thinking, even as an adult, when our inner child comes out and that little kid gets angry, even in a marriage or a relationship, like, okay, I have a beanbag in my house. I have a talking stick, my brainy.
Exactly. We do that. Actually, my husband and I have been married for 35 years, and I have 4 kids. They're all adults, and they all work with me, and we all together pretty much all the time. And so it's very easy to get worked up, and all of us, like, we know when we are getting worked up, we'll do in meetings, we'll do NeuroCycles, because you can do it in under 10 seconds. And you can, for the day-to-day struggles, and then you can do the NeuroCycle. If there's a big trauma, then you would do it daily for 15 to 45 minutes for cycles of 63 days, which is how long it takes to form a habit, not 21. Right. So, and I've done a lot of work on that too. I publish on that, and I'm doing a research study now confirming those, but pretty much that's the length of time. So it's great. I mean, we'll have an argument, my husband and I as well. And I know we'll both separate out to our little space. We both found our little beanbag space, our NeuroCycle space, and we'll resolve it with my kids too. It's become, and I did so much family therapy, and this is one of the first things I taught. Hey, let's create this mental space, and let's create this physical space. So it works. Anyway, then your second step is did you want to ask me?
Go ahead. No, go ahead.
So I'm giving the big picture. Obviously, the details are in the book, whatever. The next thing is, once you've gathered awareness, it's like flying a plane. If I've prepared, I've done my breathing, and I've done a meditation, or I've done a little activity. Like another example of a preparation would be something like, okay, you're very cross, you're very angry, you've got your kids fighting in the car, they're angry. You say, okay, let's think of 5 things we can see, 4 things we can smell, 3. It's those simple things. There's so many brilliant techniques out there that will prepare the brain to tune down and get into alignment so that you can actually sort out the problem and manage your mental health. So before I go on, just to circle back to your very first question, how do you talk to kids about mental health? This is how you do it. So we don't have to say scary words like mental health, mental illness, schizophrenia, bipolar. Use those as adjectives in the discussion, if necessary. Rather just talk about the other things in terms of those 4 signals. You'll get much better responses. You'll get your teenager opening up to you. You'll get that, adolescent and so on, and your young child and so on. So once you've prepared and gathered awareness, notice the word gather. I'm not just randomly becoming aware. I'm actually very focused on those 4 different signals. Once you've become aware of those 4 signals, you need to do something with them. What research shows is that if you just prepare your brain and you just gather awareness, so you become very mindful in the moment, all the language of today, name your emotions, and you don't do anything else, you will get worse. It's kind of like flying a plane. The pilot and co-pilot have to prepare everything, and the engineer and the tower and the airport. That's brain preparation. Then they take off. Following very specific guidelines to take off. It's very focused, to taking off. If they don't know how, that's equivalent of gathering awareness. But now, if that pilot doesn't know how to fly the plane will crash. The pilot has to fly and then land. So they have to learn to do all of that. That's what we have to do too. What we're teaching a lot of people with just preparing the brain is we're teaching people how to, get ready to fly, but then nothing else. So they don't progress. They just keep getting stuck and using the same preparation over and over, which is helping, but it doesn't have sustainability and actually can make you feel worse. If you just prepare and gather awareness, now what I do with all these thoughts that have come up and all these emotions, you can't just suppress them. They'll go back even stronger than before and you'll feel worse. You'll crash. And the pilot can't fly the plane, he'll crash. So we have to fly. So how do we fly? The next 3 steps of flying. And that's reflecting, which is the who, what, when, where, why. Why do I have this emotion? Why am I feeling this emotion in my body? Key with those 4 signals. And the second step is, if I'm feeling sad, where do I feel this in my body? In my tummy or in a migraine? How's this affecting my behavior? I'm drawing connections between them. Oh, I'm grumpy and don't want to talk and not eating properly or whatever. And how is this your perspective? Now, how do you teach a child perspective? Well, it's attitude, viewpoint, focus, lens. You do it with a pair, like I give examples. You do it with sunglasses. Get 3 pairs of sunglasses, one that's all pretty and flowers and Barbie-fied, or something, and then another one that's scratched. Just get cheap things, and then another one that's all broken, and have them in a box. And then you could say, how do you feel today? And they can pick up whichever pair of glasses represents. And kids, once you start that process, kids come up with other ideas for perspective. But you've gathered awareness of those. Now you can say why. Second step, why did you put those glasses on? Can you see that when you're this sad, you always seem to get that sore tummy? And there's no judgment. There's total kindness, total acceptance, total in this space. There's nothing that I love you for who you are. It doesn't matter what you're doing. You just can't hurt your brother. You can't throw toys at someone. You can't, that we'll control that behavior. We deal with the impact. So let's rather go to the chair and take our energy this way. And if your child is very worked up, this is also the space, this beanbag idea, the safe space, NeuroCycle corner, mind management corner, whatever you want to call it, is also the space where you could have maybe a little bucket with some old plates, and under supervision, you let them throw the plate in the bucket and break it. So there's an energy that's pent up that they can, throw. Or you could have little soft bean bags and let them throw it at a wall that there's no. So there's this, because kids and adults, we have pent up energy, and that's part of your brain preparation. That's what you could do. You could, and I give that as one of the examples. You could then, when you at some other time during the day or whenever, you could then take all those pieces and then rebuild the plate as an art project, which is kintsugi, the kintsugi principle of the Japanese never throw anything broken away. They always fix it with gold, and now it's the new you with all this beautiful experience, that's resilience that you talked about. So if you think of your own life, you can then take, the child can rebuild, and you can say, look at that, even though you were so broken by this divorce, we can stick those pieces together. There's, the anger towards the parents because they don't understand and, whatever. And you can rebuild and say, yes, that has affected you. This is making you sad, and that's okay. But you can still keep going if we can rebuild the vase. So that's those are the sorts of things, and I give lots of examples like that you can do kind of over time.
This is even as an adult, I don't have children, but I have been a child, and I have that inner child that I always continuously work on. Like, I can't wait to read the entire book.
Well, this is what we're finding because I have another book. I don't know if you've seen this one, but Cleaning Up Your Mental Mess. That's basically for 12 and onwards. Goodness, I need to take this. There we go. Okay.
Yeah.
See, so that, and then my app, the NeuroCycle app, this is basically for adolescents and onward. It's available on iTunes and Google Play. I'm literally give you therapy, so it walks you through. So the adults that are listening, this book, I have had adults using this book for children. I mean, for themselves as well, because they use the two together because it's so simple. But this was basically initially developed for an adult initially, teenagers, and then younger children. So it's been adapted. So it's for every level. I use this all the time. So basically,
we'll put all of everything you listed, we'll put in the show notes too, because those are great resources. So I know a lot of people want to grab those.
And what we're doing is, we're adding into the NeuroCycle app. It's a whole community that we're building. There's a webinar starting, there's a chat feature starting, all kinds of things. But currently at the moment, there's quite a lot in already. It walks you through the whole NeuroCycle and over time and how to use mini NeuroCycles. We'll be putting a parent add-on in there as well, which will be in by September. So I mean, there's all kinds of. So it's a community we're creating, and it's accessible and affordable, which is what your whole project is trying to help people to get and be empowered to help them manage their mental health. And it doesn't mean that life's going to not throw lemons at you, but it literally is life throws lemons. How do you make lemonade kind of thing? And it's such a stupid saying, but it's such an effective saying. And it allows you to cry. It allows you to be sad. Very often I find with patients when they've been going through this process, when they've had, and I talk about this in the Cleaning Up Your Mental Mess book. I talked about one of the clients in our study who was one of the study's clinical trials. He was incredibly depressed and was giving up on life, suicidal, had done everything, just couldn't cope. And long story short, they had done every therapy, everything that you can imagine, therapies, medications, and so on. And they just had enough. And though no one had told them how to be empowered and how to manage their mind, they were just told they were broken. And it turns out that when they came into the trial, we do all the brain stuff and all the psychological stuff and the narrative, and then they got the app, the NeuroCycle app. So I didn't give them therapy. They didn't even meet me. And this is the power of empowerment. They were simply had the app loaded on their phone, and then they went and often went through the NeuroCycle, and they discovered that through that process, they had suppressed years and years of trauma, and that had exploded in their life and exploded in their body. They had all kinds of illnesses and all kinds of stuff, which we picked up as well with the clinical trial. Within 9 weeks, this person was back on track, or their biological numbers had stabilized. In the process, they actually got, at one point, sort of 3 weeks in, they got more depressed. So they came back into the clinic because it was a clinical trial over fixed points. And they said they're even more depressed and more anxious. But it's different. They were depressed and anxious because they had seen why they were depressed and anxious in the beginning. So they were grieving and having a very normal depressed response to see all those years of trauma that I'd suppressed, all the years the inner child had lost. So that was a sadness for the inner child. And that's normal. That's not a disease. That's not, that's the sort of thing, what I don't want to assume anything because I don't know the story of your mom, but someone who has gone through something like schizophrenia, that description, it's a broken mind. It's someone who's been through so much extensive stuff that we can't even begin to understand. And to put those pieces together, it takes a lot of time. But when the mind shatters, the brain and body will shatter, and it takes time to pull that all back together again. So if we can be as proactive as we can in preventing stuff staying inside. This young woman that I'm talking about now, she was on that road to completely breaking down if she didn't do herself in. And I've seen thousands now. It's not just a few people, it's thousands over my years of working. And I'm not saying I have a system that is the solution. I'm not saying don't do anything else. I'm saying do everything all the beautiful techniques that are out there. Take what works for you. There's so many options, but just put it in the right framework, because then you actually are changing your psychoneurobiological network. Why must you change the psychoneurobiological network, your mind-brain-body connection? Because that's what's driving you. That's what's driving you. So you need to change what it looks like. As I tell the kids, you need to go find that ugly tree, buy the signals. The NeuroCycle helps you find the tree, it helps you pull it up, and it helps you take plant food and heal the roots so that the ugly part of the tree shrinks and becomes tiny, and the big part of the tree grows beautiful and big and healthy. So you can still be sad. You can still have times where you think of those things and you cry, because it's okay to be sad and depressed about what happened, but it doesn't drive you anymore. The big healthy part of the tree, that's your new driving force. So does that kind of make sense?
It does. And when we're talking about my mom, she passed away in 2021, and
I'm so sorry.
I was with her last 3 days, and she only spoke about regret. And she didn't have all these tools. It's a lot of hard work, but there's that fear of working on the mind and then having that stigma of something's wrong with me. I don't believe a diagnosis is an end all. It's like, okay,
It's the start of the description.
yeah, absolutely. I want to make sure we have time for at least 2 community questions. Is that cool?
Okay. Of course, absolutely.
Okay. So this is from Tone It Up community member who's been here for 13 years. She's actually going to be she's coming to my house and going to be on the podcast this week. And she's a school teacher. She is asking, how can educators better help parents and students with problem-solving skills with peers at school?
Wonderful. Okay, so I did a study 18 months ago, and about just over 12 months ago, working with teachers to help them with their mental wellness so that they can help their students, because the wellness of a child at school and the wellness of a child at home is based on the wellness of the parents. So and I showed significant changes. So that's under peer review. So there's science behind what I'm about to say. So this book is great for teachers if they've got young, so 2 through 10, and if they've got 11, if they're working with older children, middle school and high school, then I would recommend the Cleaning Up Your Mental Mess book. So basically, if you learn it for yourself and then demonstrate how you're using it, that's a great way. So if you have it, honestly, take whatever time you can in a day. Mind drives everything. Take the time to follow through the explanations of how I explain thoughts and mind and mental health. Kids absolutely love this. They eat the stuff up. They love the words brain. They love the stuff. And if you can try and allocate at least an hour a week or 10 minutes each day or something in the course of your week, working on these things, they will respond. And then as situations arise, you can then use the NeuroCycle in the way that I described. You could maybe even have a corner in your classroom where you can actually then say, okay, let's go sort out this argument here, and you facilitate. You don't do, you facilitate. That's the whole thing here, is you're not fixing your child. You can't. You're not fixing your pupil. You can't. You can't fix anyone. You can only fix yourself, but you can facilitate. So that's what the principle is here, how to facilitate the child, how to manage this. So as issues occur. So what we found when I worked a lot in schools and trained teachers and thousands of teachers in schools in Africa and here. And so once you have the system going and once you have that area designated, kids will naturally gravitate to that area to resolve problems. I didn't get to the third and fourth and fifth step, but the third step is kind of like a writing step, but it's not journaling. It's actually messy writing in bubbles all over the place. It's called a metacognitive bubble cog. Once you can just literally draw circles on the ground if you've got young kids, but draw a big circle in the middle and then draw four circles coming out of it, but big enough if you can that the kid could stand in it. If you can't, you can just do it on a piece of paper as a demonstration and they can point, and you could use blocks or something. But if you can teach that, that's the first bubble would be the first signal. Let's talk about our emotions. Let's talk about, and you could have pictures in boxes that you've cut out and you've got the 4 boxes of the different signals, and the kids can pick them up and they can put them in that circle. So those are the sorts of things you can do to make it very practical. Once they're in the circle, you then, the words or the pictures or whatever, you then go through the rest of the steps, which is the right stage is creating this bubble thing or writing down in this kind of messy way, which stimulates the 2 sides of the brain to work together and activates deep insight. And then you would go through the recheck and reflect, which closes the cycle. It flies and lands the plane, which is basically, this is what's happened. What are we going to do about it? It's very simple overview. The details are, as I said in the book, and the active reaches the action. What are we going to do now to move forward? So it's just, that's really a Cliff Notes version, but you can apply this in the classroom. But I would start once again with you. The first time you demonstrate it, use yourself. Say, I had this happen to me. Obviously, age appropriate, and you share what's relevant and what's comfortable sharing. Demonstrate that to them and say, would you like to try this next time you feel sad? I tell you, it's a game changer in the classroom.
Yeah, that's amazing. Thank you. That's a really good tip. So, all right. And then our last question is, this is kind of a heavy one, but my daughter lost her father to an accident. How do I help her when I'm trying to help myself?
That's really sad. I'm so sorry that that's happened. So there's so much grief and trauma. And I would once again say, grief, I've done a whole podcast on this, and I've got a whole mapped in my blog, because our podcast match our blog. So if you go and search Cleaning Up Your Mental Mess, there's actually a podcast and a blog showing how to use the NeuroCycle to deal with grief. And it's stages. So the big thing with grief is that it's not that time heals. Time doesn't heal. That's such a terrible saying, and it's invalidating. That's what happens, is that space grows around you. So it's still the same. If you think of a jar, and I've got this demonstration on my Instagram page. If you take a stone and you put a stone into 3 jars, and you can do this with your child and yourself. So this is backtrack. This is the first thing I would do, is get 3 jars, get a little stone, and put the jar in the 3 glasses, a tiny one like a shot glass, then a normal drinking glass, and maybe a little mason jar, something like that. So 3 different sizes. Put the stone should be big enough that it fits tightly into the mason jar, into the shot glass. And then what you do is you put that in there and say, this is the pain of losing Dad to an accident. It's in here. It's tight. It's making us feel terrible. And then you talk together, like you start, I feel like this. It feels like this in my body. You go through those signals. And you say, this is normal. This is terrible. And you cry, and you could even then while you're holding that, you could even then go and draw maybe on the board. If it's got a white paint thing or paper, you can then start putting all your whatever's coming out, putting it down how you feel in that moment. And then you can invite the child to join in with you at each stage. You can either go through all 5 steps on your own, or you could invite her to say, I feel like this. Do you want to say how you feel? So you do it as a collaborative, however way works best in that moment. And then you say, okay, this is how we feel now, but maybe in a few weeks' time, maybe it's going to be a few days' time, maybe it's going to be a few months' time, I don't know. But eventually that stone, same pain, but look, it's in the bigger glass. There's a bit more space. I can cope a little better. And then over time, I put in the big one. Eventually, I'll get to the point where I've got enough space that I will still feel sad, but I'll be able to keep going on. Something like that. That's and then so that things on my Instagram, that actual demonstration. And as I said, there's a podcast, there's a NeuroCycle worked out for them. And then I actually have grief in the new book. I have stuff on grief in there as well.
That's amazing. Yeah. So everywhere you can follow Dr. Caroline Leaf, we will put in the show notes. Definitely get how to help your child clean up their mental mess. There's so many takeaways here. I can't imagine how much information is out there through your books, your app, everything. Again, when we were talking in the beginning, I'm like, my dad who just left read one of your books. So big fan here.
So lovely. Thank you so much.
Thank you for coming and chatting with us.
The big silence. The big silence. The big silence.